And a wounded Islamic Republic would be a very dangerous one. When the moment comes, people will pour to the streets and they would try to repeat what they did, the demonstration in January. But this time, they need to have the support, the military support that Trump promised in January behind them. What make this military campaign against the Islamic Republic successful at the end is the role of people.
Hi there, this is episode 422 of Roqe. Dear Western liberals and left, the mullahs are not your friends. Now, surely some of you already know this, but given the absurdity of what we've been seeing lately, people carrying placards of Ali Khamenei at pro-regime rallies in Western cities, mourning their dear leader as some kind of anti-imperialist hero, and waving the flag of the Islamic Republic as if it's a beacon of progressive freedom, a reminder may be in order. A message to the leftists: the mullahs are not your friends. Look, we get it. You've made it very clear you don't like Trump, you don't like Netanyahu. Anything that feels like Western military intervention triggers a reflex, and anything anti-American feels satisfying. But opposition to the U.S. does not automatically make someone a champion of justice. Sometimes it just makes them another tyrant. And the clerical regime in Iran is not a misunderstood revolutionary movement. It is one of the most brutally reactionary governments on earth. This is a regime that executes gay people, imprisons women for showing their hair, shoots teenagers in the streets for protesting, funds militias across the Middle East, and jails and executes journalists and artists and students and doctors for telling the truth. If that sounds like a progressive ally to you, it might be time to revisit the syllabus. Dear Western liberals and left, the mullahs are not your friends. And this strange romance is not new. In 1979, large segments of the global left also convinced themselves that the Islamist revolution in Iran was a kind of anti-imperialist awakening. Western intellectuals flew to Tehran to meet Ayatollah Khomeini. Some described him as spiritually enlightened. Others imagined an exotic new form of revolutionary democracy. Within months, the executions began. Leftists were jailed. Women were forced into compulsory hijab. Universities were purged. Political parties were banned. And eventually, liberal nationalists and communists and leftists and progressive intellectuals were all dead. The revolution devoured the very people who helped romanticize it. History tried to warn us: the mullahs are not your friends. Now look, you don't have to support war. You do not have to vote for Trump. You do not have to support Israeli policy. All of that is your democratic choice. But pretending the Islamic Republic represents liberation or resistance or progressive politics is not moral clarity. It is ideological laziness and blindness. And worst of all, it abandons the very people who actually share many of your values. The Iranian people, men and women fighting for freedom, students risking their lives, citizens demanding democracy. They're not carrying portraits of mullahs. They're trying to get rid of them. Dear Western liberals and left, the mullahs are not your friends. And the sooner that becomes obvious, the sooner the world might finally stand on the right side of history. It's March 9, 2026. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 422 of Roqe, the Iran Rises series. We've been continuing here. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. Salam Dustan Aziz, Durud Basham. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are tuning in from around the world. This is the 19th episode in our Iran Rises series, and this one entitled The Mullahs Are Not Winning. Once again, events inside Iran and around the Iranian diaspora are moving at breakneck speed. So we should note that we're recording this episode at approximately 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in Toronto on this Monday, March 9th. That's around midnight in Iran. And as always, we're sharing perspectives and conversations as up to date as we possibly can. Now, coming up on this 422nd edition of Roqe, Let's take a closer look at the current state of things in Iran, and with this war now in its 9th day. I'm going to be joined by Iranian-British journalist Bozorgmehr Sharafedin, the head of digital news at Iran International. And as competing narratives swirl across Western media, some claiming the regime is somehow emerging stronger, others warning of global catastrophe, World War III, we want to try and cut through some of the noise and look at what may actually be happening inside the country. What does the emergence of Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader signal? And is it really an indication of anything that millions of Iranians have not taken to the streets while bombs are falling and they've been counseled to stay indoors? And could targeted strikes against regime infrastructure actually shift the balance in favor of Iranian protesters? All of that, and we'll chat about Bozorgmehr's forthcoming book, Stolen Revolution, as well. Let's get to it. This episode of Roqe is brought to you with the support of Famluxy. Famluxy is a cultural fashion platform dedicated to supporting and showcasing independent Iranian artists. In a time when Iranian voices and creativity face unprecedented challenges, Famluxy stands as a bridge, bringing the spirit of Iranian craftsmanship to the world. In 2023, Famluxy introduced its exclusive collection, Glory Days, at New York Fashion Week, featuring the King and Queen line, an artistic tribute to 2,500 years of Iranian imperial heritage and the timeless strength of our culture. So today, in solidarity with the Iranian freedom movement, the entire Glory Days collection is offered at cost price to customers with a 40% discount using the code Roqe. So go to famluxy.com and use the code Roqe, famluxy.com, and use the code ROQE to get your Glory Days Iran clothing at cost. Thanks to Famluxy for honoring heritage, amplifying art, and standing with Iran. Today's episode of Roqe is brought to you in part by Stellar Law. Stellar Law is a boutique litigation firm based in Toronto, founded and led by Rana Nusrat Pana. The firm represents businesses and professionals in commercial and contractual disputes, particularly where relationships have broken down and the consequences are significant. Stellar Law's practice is grounded in careful analysis and strategic decision-making. Much of the work involves contract disputes, shareholder conflicts, and complex business disagreements that require both legal precision and practical judgment. Rana and her team are known for approaching these matters with clarity and focus and a deep understanding of what's at stake for their clients. For those navigating serious disputes with real commercial impact, check out Stellar Law at stellarlaw.ca. Stellarlaw.ca. Thanks again to Rana and the team at Stellar Law. And if you're Iranian and you want to do this business in Persian, Stellar Law operates in both English and in Persian. So go to stellarlaw.ca. All right, my guest today is an Iranian-British journalist and documentary filmmaker. He began his career working for various newspapers and magazines in Tehran. He joined the BBC in London as an editor in 2008. He then became a reporter at Reuters, covering Iran's nuclear negotiations, international sanctions, and global energy markets. In 2023, he won the National Press Club's Edwin M. Hood Award for Diplomatic Correspondence. He's now the head of digital news at Iran International, and he has a new book coming out that he has co-authored entitled Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. Bozorgmehr Sharafedin joins me from Washington, D.C. right now. Hello, sir.
Hi. How are you doing, Jian?
I'm very happy to have you on the show. We've been trying to organize this for a while. Thank you for doing this, and congrats in advance on your new arrival, your new baby, your new book coming out soon.
Thanks for having me.
Actually, I might start there because it's interesting timing for you to have a new book coming out about a revolution, albeit the one in 1979, when we are prospectively in the middle of a new revolution. How does recently having written that book inform the way you are watching the events that we are watching daily now in Iran?
Yeah, I think we got lucky with the timing of the book, I should say. The book is coming in June, and it's very topical. We started working on the book 5 years ago. I should say that the idea of the book came from Yegane Torbati. She was at the Washington Post at that time. Now she's with New York Times, Iran correspondent at New York Times. So at that time, the idea of the book was formed around protests in Iran. It was 2019 that we had a massive protest. And it was mainly those protests were mainly economic protests, because in 2009, we had the Green Movement, which was a political protest. But a decade later, we saw protests in 2017 and 19, but these were economic protests. So the idea of the book was how we can show this transformation, because there have been many books written about Iran's political system, but not many about Iran's economy. Not many books about the Revolutionary Guard's economic empire and the mafia state that had been formed in the Islamic Republic. So the book, if I want to summarize the book and the thesis of the book, it's that how a system turns into its exact opposite. And it's quite topical when we look at the current situation of Iran, because the trajectory continued and even became worse and worse. So we saw a nation who was totally fed up with the system, and they want to end the Islamic Republic because there is no hope for reform. And if you look at the demonstrations in the last decade in the Islamic Republic, you see no matter how many people the Islamic Republic kills, the next wave of strength is always stronger.
Yeah.
So we had in Green Movement, maybe they killed a dozen of people, and then they killed dozens, and then hundreds. In the new wave, tens of thousands. But it seems that there is nothing that can stop the Iranian people from coming to the street and create another revolution.
Although sadly, it's been tit for tat. With each uprising, the crackdowns become bigger as well. They, as you say, implicitly in what you're saying, they're also killing more people each time. When you talk about the revolution being turning into a mafia, turning into the opposite of what it ostensibly stood for, 40 years later, you're saying. It didn't take 40 years for that to happen, right? I mean, it was already a year and a half in, or a couple of years in, it turned on its head in terms of what the promises of even someone like Khomeini were, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So political oppression started early on. So that it started killing their rivals and even old allies. Yeah, that was there. The economic oppression transformed. In the early years of the revolution, we had this massive confiscations that they went after the money of anyone that they thought they were not loyal to the system.
Right.
So they confiscated assets of people that they believed that they were not believers into the new system. But at that time, they still had some grassroots support among the poor. And they created this idea of mustazafin, or oppressed. Right. And they said the Islamic Revolution is the revolution of the oppressed against the oppressor. So they were saying that we are stealing money, we are taking the money from the wealthy to distribute it among the poor. So that's why the Islamic Republic had, for the first 2 decades, some grassroots supporters, mainly in rural areas and among the poor. But in the last decade or so, that has changed. If you look at the map of protests in Iran, you see most of the protests are happening in rural places and among the working class and the poor. So that is the change or shift that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
That it's losing the core supporters.
Even one of the criticisms of the Green Movement was that this was a middle-class kids, a rich kids revolution, and it didn't have the support of the poor or the working people, and yet, as you say, this time it was actually started by the Bazaris and small villages, etc. When you talk about stolen revolution, I mean, it's all there in the title. Of course, there are going to be people who say that they don't think there should have been a revolution at all in 1979, and that was a big mistake. And there are certainly people who are saying that in hindsight, who may have been sympathetic or supported it and now say there shouldn't have been a revolution. But the idea that the revolution gets co-opted has been something that has been preemptively raising alarm bells now. I mean, it seems so premature to talk about this when just getting rid of the regime would be an accomplishment at this point. But what have you learned about how, in this case, if, for example, there is a relatively peaceful a transition period, if, say, it's overseen by Prince Reza Pahlavi and there's a transition, how do we avoid the co-opting of this by a group that muscles its way and kills its enemies the way the Islamic fundamentalists did, the formalists did?
Yeah, I think that was the core part of the book, because that was the main motivation for me and for Yegane to write the book, because it's a historical book, but at the same time, we don't want the Iranian nation to repeat the same mistake again. So, and that's why we try to go and find the exact moments that those mistakes happened. And we mentioned many examples in the book that how people with good intentions, they created monsters. So one example was, for example, Mehdi Karoubi in the book, that he forms this foundation to help the poor. And as I mentioned, they are confiscating assets from the rich and they are distributing among the poor. And this foundation, because they wanted to keep this foundation a revolutionary foundation, they didn't succumb to be supervised by the government. So they wanted to be fast, and they didn't want to be constrained with red tapes. So they decided to create these foundations parallel to the government. But we see how 2 decades later, these foundations, they take over Iran's economy. They don't pay tax. They don't get audited. And that's why they totally demolish the Iranian economy and they create the core part of the mafia state. So our point in the book is that even decisions made with the best intention to help the poor, to help the people, they can turn into damaging actions. And that's why I think the rule of law is one of the most important concepts that we are emphasizing in the book. The problem with revolutions is that they're hasty, they are emotionally charged. So rule of law usually takes the back seat. So that's the main point that we are making in the book, that we are hopeful that the next revolution won't do the same mistakes.
One of the mistakes of the 79 revolution, I mean, I haven't had the pleasure of getting to read the book yet, because I should mention to people it comes out in June, although I've read the synopsis and I'm excited to talk to you about it. But looking at 1979, one of the issues, one of the mistakes, one of the turning points dovetails with what I opened the show with today, which is talking about, I suppose, warning Western liberals and people on the left that the mullahs are not your friends, since we're now seeing these rallies in Western cities carrying Khamenei's, I mean, the now dead Khamenei's poster and seeing him as some sort of freedom fighter through the lens of anti-imperialism, and that was certainly one of the romances of the 1979 revolution, where the left, even the Tudeh, think, okay, let's join forces with these guys in some sort of anti-imperialist effort, and then of course they're the first ones pretty much that are also exercised or executed, right?
Exactly. So I think the Islamic Revolution, 1979 revolution, I think we should look at it as a leftist revolution still, because at the end, Khomeini borrowed most of his discourse from communists and leftists at that time. The dichotomy between the oppressor and oppressed was the exact borrowing from bourgeois and proletariat from the Communist Party. So they borrowed the same concept about justice and creating a just society based on communist ideas and leftist ideas. And that's why after the revolution, many leftist figures showed interest in the revolution. They traveled to Iran, Michel Foucault and many others. They came to Iran and started writing about it, because for them, this revolution, because it was anti-American, it was a very interesting concept. And that's why I think the left doesn't want to support the revolutionary movement of Iran. When the recent wave of protests happened in Iran in January, the left remained silent. I just want to emphasize that the students in most American cities were camping in their universities to protest against the killing of innocent people in Gaza. But how come they never came out? I don't say they occupied the universities, but why there was not a single protest to support the Iranian protesters among the American or Western university students? I think for them, this anti-American part of the Islamic Republic is the most important feature of it. And the part that the Islamic Republic is the most oppressive regime is something that they prefer to turn a blind eye to. So that is what we are dealing. And to be honest, Iran's revolutionary movement is not the first that is suffering from that indifference. Many movements.
Oh, really? Because I feel like it's very unique, the situation in Iran, and it's turning the ideological rigidity of the people on the left or wherever can't figure out what's going on. How can we possibly support this if Trump's in favor of it, etc. And I think that's a very unique situation. Tell me what are other examples of that?
I think the example that comes to my mind is that why there was no protest to support Afghan women. So why suddenly the left is quiet when it comes to Afghan women? Why the left is quiet when it comes to many civil wars in Africa or the dire situation in countries like Somalia? I think they only step in when they can blame the United States for that and Israel for that, because they see Israel as the main ally of the United States. And that's why when they see a situation in which they can't blame the Americans, they should blame the Iranian government, for example, they lose their compass. I think that's why they prefer to stay quiet.
Yeah. Okay. Let me bring us up to the present day, because I'd be remiss if I didn't use your expertise to ask you a bit about what's going on right now. First of all, over the weekend was the announcement of the new supreme leader, the son of Mojtaba Khamenei. You made the point on the weekend that most Iranians have never even heard this man speak, which was an observation. It's not something I'd thought about, but then I thought, it's true. I don't know what he even sounds like. Talk to me about what that means, what that symbolizes, that somebody who's become the supreme leader is someone that Iranians are not even used to having ever heard from.
Yeah, I think that was a point that I want to emphasize on, that because many Iranians, this is very unusual for the next leader to come to power and no one knows how he sounds. I should say that the only public video available from Mojtaba is a 1-minute video in which he's canceling his classes in the seminary. So he's not even addressing people, he's addressing his students. It's like a video message that I might send you to cancel an appointment. So that is the only the public video available from him. So, this is really bizarre, because if you even
has that been by design? I mean, has he intentionally never spoken publicly, or he's there, because it is quite bizarre, isn't it?
It is, because even if you look at our region, first of all, I think the succession of a son to a father is a bizarre concept by itself.
Right.
But even in our region, that such concept is common, because we saw that in Syria, Bashar Assad replaced his father, or in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman will most likely replace his father. Even in those countries, they are create some preparation for that. Like uh, Mohammed bin Salman, years before succession, he is a public figure. He
Yes.
delivers speech. He's getting ready for that, and people know him. So when the transition happens, when the succession happens, people know who is the next leader. In the case of Bashar al-Assad replacing his father, years before the death of his father, he was a military figure. He portrayed himself as a modernizer. He brought internet to Syria. So people knew him before he became the new president. In the case of Mujtaba, he has been the man behind the scene for more than 2 decades. And I think it shows that the factor of popularity is not one of the priorities of the Islamic Republic anymore.
Right.
They don't want this new leader to be popular or have a public status. They're not even concerned about it. They didn't even bring him out to deliver a speech before the announcement. So they prefer to keep him a secretive figure behind the scenes. So I think
Who's they?
is
Who's they? Who's pulling the strings when you say they are referred to, etc.?
I think in this case, definitely we are talking about the most inner circle part of the establishment, which is the Revolutionary Guards, and also the main officials at the office of the Supreme Leader. So for them, the most important factor is continuity. So they want continuity because they want the status quo. They want it to continue as it is. So popularity, the vote of a nation, that's not a priority at this stage. So that's why they prefer Mujtaba. Even his surname is a sign for continuity. So
Yes.
that's good for them. So, and I think this is a big transformation in the Islamic Republic. Look, I think if we believe if in the Islamic Republic they believe the supreme leader is representative of God on earth, or the successor of Prophet Muhammad. So the question is how this successor is chosen. Is he chosen by God, or he's chosen by the people? So I think this was always a philosophical and practical challenge in the Islamic Republic since the beginning. In the case of Khomeini, the case was very straightforward, because Khomeini had a high popularity and he was a grand Ayatollah. So he had both. He had popular support and religious support. So, and they included that in the first constitution under the Islamic Republic. When it comes to the leadership, they mentioned the leader is a person who is recognized by people as the next leader. So they gave a lot of weight to Iranians. But when Khamenei was chosen as the successor, they deleted this part from the constitution, the revised constitution. They said people didn't have a formal role in the election. And they said, okay, the assembly of experts will choose the next leader. But still, popularity was a big factor at that time in 1989 when Khamenei was chosen, because he was chosen not because of his religious status. He was not an Ayatollah. He was chosen because he had served 8 years as the president. Right. He was a recognized figure. But here, when we come to the third supreme leader of Iran, he doesn't have religious status. He doesn't have 8 years of experience as the president, and he doesn't have the popularity. So all the three factors on which the leadership was installed they're non-existent in the case of
Okay, so
Mujtaba.
two quick questions. I mean, one, I mean, look, I don't think I know any, having just spoken to friends and pundits and observers and smart people who've been watching this stuff for years. I don't think I know anyone who thinks that Mujtaba Khamenei is going to stay and, is going to hang around too long through any choice of his own anyway, or not. And I don't know very many people, obviously, in terms of Iranians around the world who would want a continuity of this regime and with this man. But for the sake of argument, if he's there, I mean, what do we know about his competence? Or is that not a factor because there's these other people around him that will help pull the strings and maintain continuity?
I think if we believe that he was a member of inner circle that ran the country before, so we can't rely much on his competence either. So because look at the Islamic Republic at this current situation. We are dealing with a fallen economy. We are dealing with a government that can't provide the basic needs of people, water shortages, electricity shortages. And it's not that Mujtaba wasn't a part of that establishment. So in that sense, there is no hope for a change. Look, I think this message of continuity that the Islamic Republic is sending to the people and to the world, it won't be received well, because I think the Americans will continue confronting the Islamic Republic. They will try to eliminate Mujtaba the way they tried to eliminate his father. And for the people, it will remain the same. Iranians don't even need to change the slogans. It was death to Khamenei before, death to Khamenei now. So for them, I think it's game as usual. They will move forward to topple the regime.
It was an interesting choice in the sense that the regime doesn't even want to create the postulate that it's trying to reform or change or throw a bone to but that's also, I would interpret that as a sign of weakness, that they're cornered, and so the same way a kid screams back at a parent or something, it's like, no, I'm not gonna, now we're gonna put Mujtaba there in this case. Sadly, it's not as comical as all that, but it doesn't seem like a move that you would make if you think that you're trying to find a way out of this.
Yeah, I think the natural trajectory, if you look at the natural trajectory of the Islamic Republic, it was more natural to choose another former president, as the next supreme leader. I think maybe Hassan Rouhani was preparing himself to be the next leader, and he had positioned himself in the last few months to be the next leader. I guess his camp will be very disappointed, and I think we are seeing some sign of internal struggle within the Islamic Republic, because I'm sure there are people within the system who believe that even appointment of someone like Hassan Rouhani will buy some time, because it will send a signal that we are ready for change, and it will buy some time. But now we are dealing with the Islamic Republic that I would say it's not even the same. It would be more hardline, because you choose the same leader whose father you have killed.
Right.
It would be even more hardline in that sense.
So some of the Western media, and certainly social media, have adopted this narrative 6 or 7 days in, that this is a disaster for the United States. I mean, particularly some of the media that were already not supportive of Trump. This is a disaster. It's not working out the way it should be. You even see some people saying things like Karim Sajapour even wrote a piece saying Trump has lost his way. It looks like he's making it up as it goes along. And some have said this is the beginning of World War III, that they've stumbled into a World War III. You've made the case that it's neither of these things. Why?
I think what kept the Islamic Republic in power for almost half a century was not its power. It was its projection of power. It was its power to create an image of itself via propaganda to pretend that it's much stronger than what it was. For years, when any analyst or politician was talking about attack against the Islamic Republic, they would say, oh no, the whole Middle East would turn into a volcano of fire, and we would see World War III. But that didn't happen in June attacks in the 12-day war, and also now. I think we should remember that the Islamic Republic, as many realize, was a paper tiger. So if you look at it, like a week after the start of the war and the killing of Khamenei, the Islamic Republic has failed to bury Khamenei, to hold a public ceremony for its assassinated leader.
Right.
It has also failed to create a strategy to defend itself. The president comes to on TV and says that, oh, attacking neighboring countries was wrong. The Leadership Council has decided that all those attacks should stop. Immediately after that, the Revolutionary Guards would issues a statement and said, no, we would continue hitting our neighboring countries. And Ege, the head of judiciary, who is a member of the same council that Pezeshkian is referring, says, no, we will continue hitting our neighboring countries. So that shows that they have failed even to establish a coordination between military and political institutions. So in that sense, I think Iranian proxies showed that they're much weaker than expected. They failed to open a full-scale front against United States and Israel. Also, we see that Iranian allies, China and Russia, did not weigh in did not send military support to save Iran. Look, of course, Russia and China prefer to keep Iran in their orbit, but they have other partners in the region as well. If you look at the level of trade between China and Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it's much higher than Iran. So they would try to create a balance in the region, and they won't support Iran to lose their trade partners. So adding all of that, I think the world has realized that the threat of Iran was somehow exaggerated. And I want to also add that I think President Trump is very good at keeping all the options open. He's very good at keeping his cards close to his chest and not showing even his top advisors what's in his mind. I think we should distinguish that from not having an idea of what you're doing. So I think if you look at Trump's policy towards Iran, it's really consistent, actually. It's from 2018, when he left the nuclear deal, and then the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards. And then when you come to the June attacks to eliminate Iran's nuclear threat, and the January attacks, the attacks in March, trying to support the Iranian people. If you look at it, it's quite consistent in that sense. I think President Trump likes to comment vaguely. I think he knows that committing to anything might not be beneficial for him in the future, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a grand strategy himself.
we live in such an accelerated world. You know, the current currency is speed, and people are scrolling, and so it may seem like it's been a long time, but this conflict, this intervention, this war started only 6 or 7 or 8 days ago, right? So it's a bit interesting to me that another of the reasons that is given for why this is a failure at this point of the United States and Israel, and those who wanted an end to this Islamic Republic regime, is that the people are not out on the streets trying to overthrow this. I mean, I've heard this now on I heard on MS Now this morning. I've heard Piers Morgan say this. I've heard Michael McConish say this. You know, across the board, because they well, we haven't seen any action from the Iranian people, which seems bizarre to me because Trump himself and Prince Reza Pahlavi and others have said stay in your homes while the bombing is happening. So there was a directive to actually not go out on the streets. But do you interpret anything from the fact that the millions haven't gone back on the streets just yet?
I think not at this stage. I think it's too early. The advice from US and Israeli government is that people must stay at home. So the fact that many of them haven't left Tehran, unlike the 12-day war in June, I think they are somehow waiting for the final stage to come and finish the job or play a role in the transition. I think, I deeply believe what make this military campaign against the Islamic Republic successful at the end is the role of people. President Trump says on the scale of 10, he rates the success of war 15. That's correct. They have militarily achieved their goals in eliminating Iran's missile capabilities and naval vessels and military bases. I think in that sense, they are ahead of the plan. But what would make this military campaign a success is at the end that what people will decide to do, and would they come to the street to finish the job. And that is quite fragile. Iranians in January, many Iranians, I can't say all of them, many Iranians in January came to the streets hoping that Trump would send military help. And even President Trump, at that time, it was early in January, he said, go and take over government institutions. The help is on its way. Well, the help didn't come. So that made many people disappointed. And then the widely shared sentiment on social media after that was that they were hopeful that the US president will commit to his promise and would send military help. They were saying that Iranians might be the only nation in the world that are praying that a foreign power would attack their country. That was the common sentiment. We saw some initial euphoria in the early days of the attack, especially after the killing of Khamenei. I think the euphoria peaked by the killing of Khamenei. But after that, of course, you can't have euphoria during a war. No targeted attack is targeted enough. You see that you gradually you would hear about the civilians' death, and that can change the mood in Tehran and other cities very swiftly. So I think the challenge for President Trump, Israel, and their allies would be how much they can keep the sentiment of the Iranian nation in their favor, because at the end, it's the Iranians who would come to determine if this was a successful military campaign or not. For example, we saw Senator Lindsey Graham, he tweeted last night that the attack against Iran's oil facilities in the last few days, it wasn't wise because that would turn the nation against the the military attacks, because the idea is that we are here to liberate you, not to totally demolish your national infrastructure. So it's a very, very delicate balance there.
Although,
To
yeah, and you, I mean, you've put it very eloquently. It just seems comically premature to me to say, well, this is clearly failing because the Iranians are not on the streets, and well, you've begun a bombing campaign in which you told the Iranian people to stay in their homes. You can't judge this as a failure because they're not running out on the streets and trying to overtake. I mean, there's something, I know I can't keep you forever. Just a couple more questions. There's something that you tweeted that I thought was really interesting, though, in the last few hours. You put up a video. Let me quote what you said. You said, "This video appears to show a drone striking an IRGC checkpoint on the streets of Tehran. If true, such targeted attacks could significantly shift the balance in favor of Iranian protesters in the future." This, to me, would be the suggestion that that we've talked to others about, where it's moving away from just sort of defanging military installations or uranium stashes, etc., to actually trying to dismantle the domestic suppression apparatus. Is that what you're talking about here? And can you explain that further?
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that toppling a government only by air force is very difficult, if not impossible. So you need boots on the ground. So for boots on the ground, you have two options: sending American soldiers to the ground. US doesn't want to do that, or arming the opposition or the Kurdish groups to come to take over. Again, the US government is very aware of sensitivity of both, and it seems that they want to avoid that. So I think the third option, to me, it seems that when the moment comes, people will pour to the streets and they would try to repeat what they did, the demonstration in January. But this time, they need to have the support, the military support that Trump promised in January behind them. And that military support can't be bombing. It's just, if imagine a street, some young people are on one side and some Basijis and Revolutionary Guards with their armored vehicle on the other side of the street. You would need drones that can target vehicles to come to the support of protesters and target those vehicles and those security forces at the end of the streets. So I think that would encourage the Iranians that they have some form of military support behind them, and the risk of casualties for the protesters is not significant. So I think that we know that the Israelis assembled drones in June attacks, and those drones were very, very precise. If they can repeat the same tactic to support the protesters, I think that would significantly change the balance in favor of the protesters. Because at the moment, yes, they are targeting military bases, they're targeting police stations, but they are empty. So these security forces, when you talk to people in Iran, they say during the day we hear a lot of explosions and fighter jets, and at night we still hear Khamenei supporters coming to the streets shouting "Haydar, Haydar" to show that they are still there and they are still in charge of the situation. So for that to change, we need a granular type of military action on the ground, which I thought that video that showed a checkpoint, not a military base, a checkpoint on a street was targeted by a drone. Again, if that's true, that's not totally verified, although the person who published it, Hamid online, he's one of the most trustworthy Iranian journalists. But if we see attacks like that, I think that would encourage many Iranians to come to the streets.
Okay, a final question to you. I think unequivocally, one of the greatest fears for the Iranian community around the world, here in Toronto, certainly I would imagine inside Iran, is that after all of this, this regime, in some form or another, survives again and continues, not necessarily status quo, because that's probably that horse has left the stable, but that some version, maybe even a worse version of the Islamic Republic regime continues. What do you think the chances of that are at this point?
I don't think there is much chance. I think the US won't let that happen because a wounded Islamic Republic would be a very dangerous one. Islamic Republic, I think in that case, would have no doubt to go for a nuclear weapon in the fastest period. And I think that option is not acceptable for Iranian people either. So I think what we see is a consensus, an international and domestic consensus, that this regime must end. And I think the delay for launching an attack against Iran was that they wanted to start it full scale and finish it. Because the 12-day war, it wasn't well planned, at least from the American side. So they were not ready for that. And they didn't have enough military assets in the region, and they didn't have a grand strategy how to finish it. So I think this time they waited a couple of months to bring all the military assets to the region. And I think they have a strategy that they would not leave the situation unfinished. Because my guess is that they won't leave it unfinished, because that would make the situation even worse than before the start of the war. So now, before that, you had the biggest beef was the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Now is that you killed the leader of the Islamic Republic. So I think I would say
no,
that,
but
that's
the natural, I mean, the orthodox Trump narrative that they would say would be that he would say, you know, we've eliminated 90% of their military, and so job's done. It was never our intention to, you know, whatever that happens to the regime is the dominion of the Iranian people. We're out of here, which would just be. You know, would be a sort of a terrifying conclusion to this, in and amongst other reasons for the people inside Iran who now have to deal with the vestiges of a regime that's going to, as we've seen historically, going to mete out its anger upon the people of the country, right?
Absolutely, that would be terrifying. But I think it's very unlikely that we see that happening. I think the worst case scenario, in my view, at this stage, is a Venezuela style. I think that the U.S. government will put in place a leader from within the Islamic Republic. I think that would, in my mind, in the spectrum, that is the worst. I don't see anything worse than that. I don't think the U.S. will allow Mujtaba to continue ruling and pack up and go and end the military campaign. I think that is, in my calculations, I would see that as the worst case scenario. And the best case scenario, I would say, of course, if they finish the military job and allow the Iranian people to choose the next leader.
Bozorgmehr, I think you asked me a couple of hours ago, you sent me a message saying, how long do you think it'll be? And I said, half an hour, 45 minutes, and I've kept you almost an hour, but it was just so interesting. I didn't want to end it. Thank you so much for making the time today. Thank you for your insights. And once again, congratulations on the imminent release of your book. We'll look forward to it, Stolen Revolutions. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Jim.
A fruitful conversation. Thanks very much to Bozorgmehr for that. A lot covered in that segment. If you want to have your say about it, by all means, let us know your thoughts, contribute to the conversation, start a discussion, give us something that you want me to read on the air. related to the topic, of course. info@roqemedia.com is where you can find us. info@roqemedia.com, or you can just post on any of our platforms where there are comment sections on YouTube or on Apple, on SoundCloud, etc. This is full time for this episode of Roqe Today. Thanks to the amazing core team who put this show together twice a week. The photo and video queen Tina Farahi, the super Parisa Zanjarani, and the savvy Roham Meher. Special thanks as well to Smart Pega, Charming Kimia, Talented Anahita, Methodical Kaveh, and the Rising Keon for all of their help. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and for sharing our content. If you are not a subscriber, it's very easy to do. You just press subscribe on any of our platforms. We appreciate when you do that, or give us a good review, or a thumbs up, or a comment. We always appreciate that. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can find the show on Instagram at Roqe Media. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. And as ever, Mizun Bashi.